Hey guys, welcome to my channel. My name is ReadingBear and I hope you are ready for some more stories. And today, we'll take a look at some new entitled people content. If you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comment. And now, let's dive right into the stories.
The first story is titled, Snob Neighbor Tore Up My Driveway, I Made His Property Uninhabitable. Never mess with a farmer. My grandparents had migrated to the USA from Europe and bought their first house together. The house was a traditional farmhouse, on a huge plot of land. In order to visit the neighbors, it would make more sense to drive over there. A couple of years ago, both of my grandparents passed away in the same year. My parents were able to inherit the entire property, including the land that it sat on. However, this was a lot of land for my parents, so they decided to sell the farmhouse, but keep the property that it sat on. They were able to divide up the property, and with the revenue they got from selling the farmhouse, rezone and build another house on the property that they had decided to live in. In another zone of the land, my parents built a house for my aunt and her husband. They were all on the same plot of land but owned their own houses. The original house did need some work, so when a local construction worker bought it, my mom and sister were happy their parents' house would still retain its beauty. It was an ideal situation for everyone involved. Until it was not. We will call the guy who bought the original house Daniel. We will call my aunt and her husband Jack and Diane, and we will call my parents William and Bertha. Daniel was not local to the country. I mean, he worked out in the country and farmlands, but he had an expensive apartment in the city. My parents were not too aware of the type of person he was, but he was not liked by the town locals, and was known to be entitled and arrogant. He did not come off this way when my parents had met him, but that was to entice them to sell him the house. Here is where things get interesting. Daniel decides that he wants to do major renovations to the house. These renovations required contractors and work trucks out at the house every single day. My parents, Jack, and Diane had no problems with this. Except one. The contractors kept parking their work trucks on Jack and Diane's property. Now, with the way the properties were built on the land, it was more efficient for these workers to park their trucks closer to Diane's property line. However, they were not warned that these trucks would be parking here, and the trucks were loaded with equipment and pretty bulky. My aunt was afraid it would tear up the grass and whatnot. If Daniel would have come over and asked politely if they could park their trucks near their house, I am sure they could have worked something out and not parked on the grass. However, they were starting to find out that Daniel was very rude and entitled. A couple of days after the work started, Jack was outside when the construction workers pulled up, and had approached them. He had politely asked them if they could not park on the grass, because it was going to tear up the ground and plants grass around it. Jack even offered for them to park on a concrete slab they had behind their garage. However, day after day they still kept parking on the grass. Well, Jack had enough. He knew how important this land was to his wife and my mom, so he decided to build a fence around the area and create a yard. It was not a complicated fence by any means, and the great thing about being from the country and working on farms was that he had all the equipment to do it himself. So that is what he did. He put some stakes in the ground, and strung planks between them. Well, of course, this caused mayhem for the construction workers. They had a longer walk to the original house, and since there were multiple workers, plumbers, general contractors, etc., sometimes they would have to wait for each to finish before they could pull up and start their own work. This seemed to be putting delays in their work, but this was something Daniel should have thought about beforehand. And in just a matter of 2 days, Daniel came running over to Jack and Diane's house, demanding that they take down the fence. Jack had told Daniel to go to hell, and that he could not tell them what to do on their property. If they wanted to park outside the fence, they could. This answer must have enraged Daniel even more, because the next day Jack had woken up and seen that parts of his fence were missing. Not the whole fence, which seemed weird at first, but realized that certain sections of the fence were taken out so the trucks could back in. We all knew it had to be Daniel. Well, Jack was not one to put up with BS, so he decided to irrigate the area. There was a well on the property, but it had limited capacity, so Jack had to call in the water company. Luckily, he knew some people there. He also knew every tow truck driver within 80 miles, and that was going to suck for Daniel's contractors because they were going to need one when they drove through all the mud and got stuck. Let us fast forward a couple of months. Daniel's house is complete, except the swimming pool that had installed. It just needed to be filled with water, and Daniel thought it was a good idea to use the well on the land in order to fill it. Keep in mind that the well is on Jack and Diane's property. Well, because the well only carries a certain amount of water, this caused major problems. The well was sucked dry, and sand and dirty was starting to pour into the well. When Jack and Diane told Daniel the damage he had caused to the well, Daniel responded that it was their fault since the well was on their property. They were absolutely livid. Jack was even trying to be nice and offered to split the cost of repairing it, but Daniel wanted to part in paying out his own cash. Well, a year or two later, Daniel announced he was selling the house. And that's when Jack saw an opportunity. He cut the well water supply leading to Daniel's house, as well as capped the septic line that led to the house. You could not sell a house with no water, right? Well, of course this enraged Daniel once he found out. His property line itself was pretty awkward and small, so he could not build or install a proper septic tank unless he removed the pool. This would obviously cost a lot of money and waste the thousands he spent on renovations. Well, Daniel decided to take Jack and Diane to court for this. He said that he was entitled to the well and septic line just as much as the other houses on the land. Unfortunately for Daniel, his case was almost immediately dismissed because it was concluded between splitting up the property and my grandparents' will, that technically no house other than Jack and Diane's were entitled to these things. My parents' house had access to these things. So that house sat vacant for months. No one wanted to buy a house that had not built-in water access or waste removal. I could not blame them, I would not want to either. Many people tried to negotiate with Jack and Diane about restoring service, but they all declined. Until a small farming corporation came in and offered to buy the house for a quarter of what the asking price was. At this point, Daniel had no choice but to accept as it had been on the market for so long. And to just rub it in even further, Jack and Diane negotiated the usage of the well water and septic line with the corporation, which pissed Daniel off to no end. This ended up jacking up the value of the price, so if the corporation decides to sell the property, they will be filling their bank accounts and more. Moral of the story: Daniel, if you treat people like shit, prepare to deal with shit. The next story is titled, "Don't Want to Pay for the Work Done, Have a Dead Yard." So, I've lurked here for a while, but never really thought any of my stories qualified until I remembered one from 2008 or 09, can't remember exactly anymore. Quick backstory to keep it from being too boring. I had recently lost my job, like most people at the time, and was having to do odd jobs on Craigslist just to get by. I recruited a friend to help me do the various odd jobs since he was in a similar situation. We pooled our resources and cobbled together enough equipment to do landscaping work, along with other odd jobs that you'd hire manual labor for. We were both young, like early 20s, and didn't really know when we were getting scammed or fooled. We got a call on one of our ads to go do some landscaping work for a guy who happened to live about a mile away. Awesome. We won't have to spend much on gas, but we will have to sacrifice our Labor Day weekend to do the job since it was a large job. The guy asked us to put in a raised bed that essentially wrapped around his entire house. Imagine a house in a newly built subdivision that has a smallish yard and few trees. He wanted the bed to be built with landscaping bricks and wanted us to copy a style that his neighbor had done. Cool, no problem. We try to discuss payment, but he keeps giving us the runaround. Because we were in a desperate situation, we get fooled into doing the work with no agreed upon labor fee. This was our mistake, one that was never made again. We were just happy to have some work. We spent 2 full days working our asses off in the middle of summer, not really knowing what we were getting paid. We were using our tools, truck, and time, grinding away, but we kept wondering why this guy was acting so shady. Finally, on day 3, near the end of the day, I'm fed up with the runaround and knock on the door and confront the guy about payment. He starts getting all aggressive and starts threatening us with non-payment, which immediately escalates the situation. I grab my friend and bring him into the argument. After about 30 minutes of arguing, the guy decides he will pay us $70 for the work. Yeah, 70 ducking bucks to split between us after 3 days of labor. Cool, duck us, right? We loaded up our truck with the tools, then wait for the guy to come out with our cash. This asshole comes out with a huge wad of cash but proceeds to still only hand over $70. We collect our money and grab our last item, a tarp. We had been using a really large tarp to put weeds, grass, and extra dirt on to make our lives easier since we didn't have a wheelbarrow at the time. The accumulated mound on this thing had to have been 4 feet high. We drag it into the middle of his front yard and dump the tarp. This is the first suck you. He was begging us not to do it, but he could eat a dick at this point. We load up and peel out, because, you know, angry youngsters. Now for the pro-revenge part. My friend's mom was a real landscaper. She heard our story and offered up some excellent revenge advice. Take the backpack sprayers we had, fill them with a warm saltwater mix, then ride over and spray his yard. We planned to do this about 2 months later. When the time came, we executed the plan late at night, around 2 a.m. We parked down at the pool parking lot, walked down to his house, and absolutely bombed this dude's yard. We came back about a month later and everything was dead or dying. Flowers, grass, small trees, all of it. Duck with the guys that are doing your yard work. Duck your yard. The last story is titled, Noisy Resort Neighbor Gets His Secret Spilled. Happened a few days ago. Throwaway for obvious reasons. My wife and I decided to go to Southern California for the holidays. We found ourselves a nice resort and checked in. All was well until we noticed that the walls in our room were very thin. As we entered our room, we could hear our next-door neighbor talking and having an argument with his girlfriend. We shared one common wall with them. They were shouting pretty loud, and we could hear everything through the wall. We'll refer to this guy as Noisy Neighbor, NN. NN kept fighting with his girlfriend about something she said earlier. We didn't follow, wasn't interested and decided to go eat and explore around the town we were in. We came back around 10 at night and all was quiet. We figured that NN and his girlfriend already went to bed, so we went to bed as well. Turns out he was out. NN and his girlfriend come back at 12 laughing and really loud. Loud to the point that we could hear them and hear their entire conversation. Looks like they made up after the fighting that morning. We hear the girlfriend say that she is hungry and NN calls for pizza delivery. It was there that we heard NN's name, phone number, and credit card info, not that we would do anything with it. They kept chatting and laughing and we could hear every bit of their conversation through the thin walls. Wife and I try earplugs, radio, and everything we could think of to drown out the noise. We were hoping that they would eventually turn in for the night and there would be some peace and quiet. Yet NN was full of energy and boyish laughter. Finally, at around 2 a.m. we decided to call the concierge and let the resort security deal with it. The resort we stayed at was meant for mindfulness and mediation, so it did enforce some quiet hours. Security called them up and told them that they were too loud and to keep their voices down. This did the trick for some time, and we fell asleep. Only to be woken up again at around 5 a.m. to some really loud sex. Like moaning and screaming from the girlfriend. After they were done with their business, they washed up and just kept talking. Laying there in bed I heard all about NN's job, where he was from, where he grew up, his political views, and so on. Finally at 6 or so we called up the front desk again. This time security actually came and knocked on their door to tell them to keep their voices down as it was still officially quiet hours. NN and his girlfriend were furious that they could be disturbed when they were just having fun and having a good time. They claimed that they weren't loud at all, and why can't they just have some fun? They threatened to leave poor reviews for the resort and made sure that all of their friends would hear about this. Security took that all in, gave them their warning, and left. After security left NN and his GF started talking shit about wife and me through the wall knowing that we could hear it. Stuff like, our neighbors are such assholes, probably, racial slur. What's wrong with having sex with my GF huh? Too loud for you pussies. And just deliberately talked to his GF in a really loud voice. Talking about how great the sex was and how she was going to scream and moan louder next time. I was frustrated at this time, with very little sleep. I took out my cell phone and recorded everything that we were hearing, hoping to show the front desk just how little soundproof the room was and hopefully ask for a room change. But then something happened. At 7 or so, we heard NN's phone ring and suddenly NN and GF were really silent. Then I hear NN say, "Hi, NN's wife. How are you sweetie? I just woke up here at the conference. Long day ahead. I miss you so much." It turns out NN was cheating on his wife with his mistress over Christmas. At this point my wife and I hatched a plan. With all the information that we had on NN, his wife's name, and where they lived, we started combing Facebook and yellowpages.com for more information. Lo and behold, we found what NN looked like, old man in his 50s, and his wife. All the information matched up with what he had been talking about all night and plus his zip code when he ordered pizza. A bit more digging, and we found where NN's wife worked and her email address. A simple Outlook.com email address. Later I compressed the recording I had and sent it to NN's wife. The best part is that the recording contained NN's wife's phone call to NN, so she had no doubt it was definitely NN. Exhausted with little sleep, my wife and I decided to just get up and go get some breakfast around town. We come back a few hours later and stop by the concierge's desk. We wanted to thank them and their security for trying to help us get some sleep and to ask for another room. Turns out we didn't need a room switch. They checked out this morning, a few days earlier than scheduled. The concierge told us. She mentioned something about an urgent family concern that NN had to attend to. Looks like our plan had worked much better than we had hoped for. The rest of our stay at the resort was quiet and uneventful. No one else checked into that room. I did show the front desk parts of my recording just so they know that they need to work on soundproofing their rooms in the future. Thank you for listening.